Another year of eight-man football upon us. Devin Albertson, Anthony Crane, the two guys behind the monster that is Missouri eight-man football coverage in the area. Guys, football season. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's finally here.
Yeah, good to be back.
You guys talk a lot now, don't you? That was impressive. Gave you guys the entire floor and nothing.
I'm happy to be here. Happy football season's here. It's a busy time of the year now for me, but
yeah.
Just happy to be here. Wow, this is like the.
See, this is why I write, though.
But you talk quite a bit at the same time. Anyway,
fair enough.
We're going
to talk about the poll.
The poll I was not invited to this year. That's fine. The Week 1 eight-man football poll.
Or we can break down your Chiefs segment, your pregame show.
We can break down that. We can break down our lives, whatever you want to do, really. I mean, it's wide open. But football, eight-man poll, Drexel 1, North Andrew 2, Platte Valley 3, Archie 4, Worth County 5, Bishop LeBlond number 6, Stanberry 7, St. Paul Lutheran 8, Lockwood 9, King City 10. Any surprises in there for you guys?
Well, for me personally, I had the top 5 in the poll is the 5 that in the order that I had them in my ballot there for the poll. I had Stanberry and LeBlond flipped at 6 and 7, so no real big shocker there. And then I did have Lockwood at 8. Then my last 2 teams in the polls that I had for my ballot was EA and Bramer. So that was my top 10. So I wasn't surprised St. Paul Lutheran and King City snuck in there. King City very successful last year. Do bring back a good group of seniors. Lost some top tier talent though, so they're kind of still a question mark for me. So no big surprises in the poll. It was good to kind of see a pretty good consensus around the voters this year. No big surprises, I don't believe, there in the poll. Anthony, what's your thoughts?
It is surprising the poll turned out to be your top 5.
It wouldn't have been if I was involved.
No, we would have had someone else getting in first place vote.
Actually, it wouldn't have been that different because I always go off the year before, like a lot of preseason polls do.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do. A lot of them do.
And a lot of them are
Which
wrong.
ones?
I just assume anything with Alabama and it goes off last year's poll, but it doesn't really matter if that's
it's because they're like number 1 every year.
Well, yeah, so it doesn't really matter. But I mean, you look at preseason polls, you don't know anything about anybody for the most part. Maybe at the college level, you don't know as much, but okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I just go off with this whole thing wrong. That's why I got fired.
We just like Mitchell better. It's okay.
Did he play?
Fair.
Anthony, what about you? What do you feel like stands out about,
The only one that kind of really surprised me was Worth County coming in at 5, just because of the talent they lost, and really we don't know what they have to replace it. I mean, we do know some of those kids that stepped up in the state title game when Reinhardt was hurt and showed some flashes, but I don't know if any of them have that workhorse capability. The new quarterback after losing maybe the best passer in the state last year. I think they'll be good. I just didn't know if they were top 5 good. I thought LeBlond, they were number 5 for me, and then the problem with or not the funny part about really 8 through 10. I mean, like Devin and I have talked about, like 8 through 16. You could put those in any order, and it'd be hard to argue with anyone for who they put. King City was another one that I was surprised snuck in there, basically for the same reasons as Worth County.
Yeah, and one thing I think Anthony and I have talked about, and other media members have talked about it among each other, is kind of the tiers in this poll. I know it's a top 10, but it's really like the top 4, the next 3, and then the next 10 kind of deal that you can put in any order, kind of as Anthony was saying there. So Worth County, LeBlond, Stanberry were in pretty much a mixture of 5 through 7 in most of the polls with it. So it was kind of interesting there. King City at number 10, they were actually only on 2 of the 7 ballots, but they got high votes in both those ballots. While a team like Bramer was on 4 of the 7 ballots, but they were all a 10 or an 8, I think 1-8 there for Bramer. So a team that maybe got a little more love across the polls, but not over any certain spot where they were highly ranked in any of them. So that was interesting. Kind of interesting that East Atchison and North Shelby, 2 teams who have been very competitive and very top tier in the state last few years, both didn't quite get the same benefit of the doubt that teams like Worth County, Stanberry, and King City got in the poll. That was just kind of interesting of how everyone kind of saw each of those teams lose a lot of talent, but a few of them got a little more love for the poll this year at the beginning of the year, at least for that, because of just certain unknowns that people are more comfortable with than others.
Is this Drexel's to lose this year, just based off what they got coming back with the coffee kid?
No, I think that's where we disagree. While I think coffee is head and shoulders above everyone else, I don't know what else they have. And as we saw in the state title game, it took a legit receiver to make plays to get them past Worth County, and I don't see that with them this year. They got a few guys that show flashes, have some speed, but for me, it's just when you look at, and that's why North Andrew was my one, just because they have receivers, they have one of the best running backs in the state. Braxton Linville was one of the better running quarterbacks in the state as a freshman, and their offensive line is just massive. And for the maybe for the first time since maybe the Schoonover era, they just have legit athletes everywhere.
Yeah, and then I agree with Anthony's assessment of North Andrew. The reason why I still have Drexel number one is while their two starters they lose from last year's team, and Corey Compton and Braden Rhodes are big losses for them, other teams are going to be losing just as much, except for North Andrew. But North Andrew has to close that gap still between being a 6-5 team to winning state kind of deal. It's still a gap they have to cross and catch up there. So I think it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there. And I think Drexel also is still going to be one of the best defensive teams in the state this year. They might not have the dudes other teams have in certain spots, but the way they play as a cohesive unit was very impressive last year. You saw it versus King City and Parker Muff there with them. So I think that gives Drexel an edge there too. The sum of their parts are maybe better than the individual pieces kind of deal, outside of coffee kind of deal, because the kid is that good. But I think the guys around him deserve a little bit more respect going into this year, just because I think they're all really good in that aspect. But we'll see. I mean, I think this is Archie's maybe best chance to upend Drexel over that last couple of years because of the talent they have back. So I'm looking forward to that Week 5 matchup. And their first 2 weeks, they both play Lockwood. So it's kind of a nice way to get them both a measuring stick of a top 10 team preseason-wise and how they both kind of handle that the first 2 weeks of the year. So we'll know more in a couple of weeks, of course. We'll get more data on all the teams kind of deal, but I'm excited to see how they all look this year.
Is Frozen over?
No.
Frozen wasn't entertaining?
She just missed me. But, and I think when we talked about this in the fastest 60 seconds with our sleepers, because the way things are set up right now, you're going to have Platte Valley, North Andrew play early. You're going to have Archie and Drexel obviously play really early, and that'll knock some teams out before the playoffs really get going. And I think that's the interesting part about the way this poll came out is like a team like LeBlanc could easily sneak into the Final Four and make a run at state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we look at the poll, the top 5 teams and 6 of the top 7 teams are all going to be on one side of the bracket. So that's going to be real projected back. All districts will be released on Friday, but that's what we're kind of assuming Michigan will do, which might be a risk there sometimes with assuming what they're going to do with districts. But based on what we expect them to do on there, so you'd have teams like
what do you think they're going to do?
What
do you think they are going to do?
I think it's going to keep the same districts as last year. They're just going to add College Heights down south, and then Sweet Springs get added to the North Shelby St. Paul Lutheran district because those districts were both 9 teams last year. It makes sense geographically and kind of what they're going to probably do with the 4 districts again this year of 10 teams. So that's what I expect them to do. So you'd have like LeBlanc and King City and Bramer all in one district fighting for it, and then like St. Paul Lutheran, North Shelby, Northwest Hughesville in the other district kind of fighting for it. So definitely not the top 6, top 5 talent that you have in the other 2 districts there with all kind of battling it out. So it'd be interesting to kind of see what the semifinals and state championship kind of look like this year with the possible lopsidedness that we're seeing here early in the year.
Yeah. So this may get me down the rabbit hole of how much I don't like the playoff format. Again, like I've said every year, into it. And I get why it's there. I just don't enjoy it at the same time. You have 48-man teams now, which I wouldn't be surprised if it's, 50, 55, 60 within the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, they're not all going to come to 8-man that quickly, but you have 4 districts of 10. Like, you got to start moving that around a little bit, don't you? Or do something different with what you're doing here with it.
I thought they would have after we crossed 32 teams, and at that point to possibly go to 8 districts. They did not, so they kept it at the 4. So I was kind of intrigued by that because the way I look at it, either you care about travel in districts or you don't. And at this point, they're kind of splitting it between the two because you have a district right now where Northwest Hughesville and Knox County are in the same district, and they're nowhere close to each other kind of deal. So it's like I get that district's going to be weird because there's a lot of travel there, but if you split it into 8 districts of 5, you would have less travel. And if you don't care about travel at all, you could just rank them 1 through 40. Or honestly, if you wanted to say, hey, the best 32 teams, you guys make the playoffs. Because honestly, if we're looking at the last few years, the bottom 8 teams in the state don't do anything when it comes to the playoffs. There's a lot of forfeits that first week just because you're 0-10 playing a team that's top 5 in the state. It's not going to be close anyways kind of deal. I know everyone wants to play the last game kind of deal, but I'd almost rather see the top 32 teams make it, do whatever bracket you want to do at that point. And the bottom 8 teams, if they win another game, they can play each other, and they'll get more out of that game playing each other, playing an equally talented foe. We saw it a few years ago with Keatsville and Bramer both opting out of the playoffs, playing each other instead during that first week of the playoffs. Bramer got their first win in a couple of years, and now this year those kids are now developed a little bit more down the road. They've got a little confidence in the program. They might be able to take the next step kind of deal. I think that's a better way for those programs to possibly improve instead of just getting their head beat in again for another time against a North Shelby or a Worth County. Like, what's the real reason for that game kind of deal? I know any given Friday kind of deal, but realistically, it's not. Realistically, it's not a thing with high school sports at times because at that point, we have 2.5 months of data of that's not going to be close kind of deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like basketball. I mean, you don't see 1-8s in high school. We've seen 1-16 in college, but I mean, you don't see 1-8s in basketball, which I know why basketball does. Every team gets in, but football, like you said, there's no need, and the kids don't get anything out of it at that point either. Especially, they don't want to go and do that. I mean, it's just
no. It brings a negative connotation to your team after a while. It's like, why would I go out for football if we're just going to get rolled every week, kind of get to the playoffs and just get obliterated kind of deal? And if you made it 32 teams instead of 40 for 8-man, the season ends Thanksgiving weekend instead of the first week in December. You're impacting less basketball at that point. There are many benefits that I see to that. I'm not sure if Michigan sees it the same way because of their past history with it, and they want to give everybody a chance for that 10th game. I just think there's a better way of doing it, looking at other states and how they kind of did it. One example that I saw this summer after talking to Liberals coach, who's from Nebraska actually, and how they kind of do it is the top 32 teams make it, and then they split it that first week. There in Nebraska, it's East versus West kind of deal. So the Western 16 teams, you rank them kind of deal 1 through 16, they play. And then after everybody wins, you then re-rank them for the final 16. You just kind of go from that point out. And I think you could do a version of that. I'm not sure the best way of doing it in Missouri because it's different geographically on there. But I think with 8-man North versus South, you could do something very similar to where you're still getting the better matchups later in the year kind of deal with that. And if you want to do that for the first week and then go 1 through 16 after that, another thing, you could get matchups you never see. You would possibly see a Jasper versus South Holt, which you would never see in a regular season game, but you could possibly see. The only negative is travel expenses are a real issue for schools with budgets and stuff like that. So something you have to always kind of account for that maybe I don't think of firsthand because I'm thinking more of the best, fairest tournament and not just travel expenses, which are a real issue with some districts, of course, around the state.
I think you muted yourself there, big guy.
My bad. So, like for me, I would completely ignore the regions because, again, I think you're going to get a lot of the good teams in one. And how you fix that is so you basically do like a college basketball system where even if you're Duke and you're the 1 seed, well, you could be the 1 seed in the West. And how you maybe solve some of those travel issues is maybe you have centralized locations. So you're using stadiums maybe in the middle of the state. And so you're not going from maybe Jasper to Mound City or whatever it may be. I think these are all lofty dreams that we have, and Michigan will never do any of this. But that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I could see something like that where you have a hybrid thing where you know that pull 2 teams out here. It's Drexel versus, I don't know, Mound City or something like that in a quarterfinal game, and they meet up in Kansas City and play at a high school there kind of deal where both teams travel to meet each other in the middle kind of deal. And you can figure that out week by week kind of deal. And it's kind of difficult in the playoffs because you don't know what bigger high schools are going to be even playing that time, who has an 8-man field and stuff like that. I think it's feasible. Will they want to put that much work into overthinking it kind of deal? I don't think so. I think that's part of the problem is they don't want to go to that. I would do it because I have nothing better to do with my life than think of possible good playoff situations kind of deal. And I know each year. And the thing is, Misha already has a point system in place where it would be very easy to rank teams 1 through 32 or 1 through 16 or whatever way you want to do it because you already use that point system to determine district standings anyways for playoffs and districts. It's not like basketball where you have kind of something like that, but the coaches vote on who's actually the top 1 through 8 kind of deal. Football is very numbers, and based on that, with few exceptions with head-to-head matchups, can flip things. So I just think there is a better way to kind of do it on there that would be determine a better true champion, and you'd have the teams who have earned that spot to be the 3 seed or the 4 seed, making it farther without Stanberry and Worth County for years meeting up in the district championship game or district semifinals because there's a concentration of talent in one area, as Anthony kind of said, or Archie might be able to play someone besides Drexel in the quarterfinals. Maybe they can prove to people around the state that they deserve to go on farther, and they're not just the little brother down there. They're actually a really talented team, or maybe they lose and they're, okay, you guys aren't quite there yet. It just gives a little more clarity kind of deal with each one of the teams, I think, and you'd maybe get a little more respect across the state, or maybe the boundaries grows more. You'd be more decisive kind of deal with that, less ambiguity. You want a big word for the day.
So it'd be like going back to, I don't know, 2010, 2011, where you had 10 games and you had your districts and you played them in the regular season, and you just do it that way. Mm-hmm. Which is, what, Devin, you were saying, because I went back and just kind of looking through. Mm-hmm. You started October 1. I mean, this is, I'm just going to 2010 because, that was my senior season. But you go back through and you start October 1. You have, there was 1 to 24th, but you have October 1, October 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29th. So you've got everything meaning something in October. Mm-hmm. There's your districts. Best 2 get out. And there were years where we had Stanberry, us, and Worth County. There was going to be somebody left out. Mm-hmm. But that made everything a little bit, regular season mattered more. Now, I mean, the regular season matters for conference and that stuff, but at the same time, you could argue we can kind of hold back a little bit if we have to here and there. I mean, we want conference, but I mean, it's like basketball. You see some teams play up competition all the time. They get to their district, they're like the 5, 6 seed, and they're rolling through districts. Yep, because they were playing up the whole time. I mean, I go on and on about how much I don't like this system. I understand it. I just don't care for it.
That's why I think there can be a mesh between the two. I think the 9 games and then still just have 32 teams, and then the other 8 teams can still find a game that week kind of deal for their own. It's kind of the best of both worlds where you still have teams who are middle of the pack and still have a chance for the playoffs kind of deal for that. But they're probably not going to win state, but at least they have an opportunity at that point to move on possibly if they get hot, or if a team – say like last year, North Andrew had a lot of injuries in the regular season. They still have a chance as a 500 team in the playoffs to prove themselves. I know they ran into Platte Valley last year, who was able to prove they deserve the 2 seed kind of deal with that. So it just makes it kind of interesting, the different possibilities that will never happen.
So. Anthony seems to have father duties he needs to get back to. So real quick, first thoughts, I guess final thoughts on week 1 heading into Friday.
Well, Anthony, you go. What do you got?
Well, when we talked about this, the questions with Worth County, South Holt was another team that was kind of on the edge there, the top 10. I went back and forth, ended up, I guess you'd put them in 11 for me. They have a real talented quarterback. The question for them, like Worth County, is what do they have around him? They have a solid group of athletes. They don't have, I think they have 14 kids on the team, but they're a pretty solid 14. Mm-hmm. So I'll be interested to see how that game goes. It's not, 2 juggernauts. The last few years, one of them has been highly ranked, or both. None of those games ended up being any good. Hopefully this one is. But I think we'll learn a lot about both teams, whether Worth County is going to prove to be a top 5 team and whether South Holt can jump up, or, we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the better games of the week. There is Worth County South Holt. I'm interested to see what happens with North Andrew King City. I think North Andrew wins that game, but I think it'll answer a lot of questions we have about King City and their unknown. If they can stick around in that game, they might be a little better than maybe Anthony and I are expecting this year. Kind of deal with that. If they can stick around, kind of deal and maybe make it a game. So it's kind of a benchmark game for both those teams to kind of see where they're at. I think kind of same thing with St. Paul Lutheran and Oric, kind of see where they're both at with each other in that conference. A big conference game early there. And then the game that I'm going to, which is Archie Lockwood, is Lockwood able to stick around and contend with the top two teams in the South? Because Lockwood was the third best team in the South last year, but the gap between them and Archie with Drexel was substantial there. So can they help close that gap a little bit this year? And then Drexel, I know they got Liberal this year, underachieved a bit last year, but I think Liberal, as Anthony saw in the Jamboree, might be the third best team in the WeMo this year. So that might be a decent test for Drexel week one to kind of see where they're at. And if Drexel struggles with Liberal, maybe we pull back a little bit on the Drexel hype as well, kind of deal with that. So there's a couple of games this week that are going to tell us quite a bit about teams going into week two.
Yeah, and the Lockwood one is interesting for me because I went to that Jamboree, and very similar to last year where they have offensive linemen that are, like Chris's size. And that was the case last year.
There's nothing wrong with that.
What could help them, though, is that Archie did lose a lot of their size from last year. And I think skill-wise, Lockwood has a lot of good players. So we'll see how they match up.
Devin, Anthony, thank you as always. We'll be back next week. Do it again. Anthony, go back to your responsibilities that you have more than I have.
Someday, buddy. Someday.